I found my husband's secret family in virtual reality. He spent our savings on a digital life while ignoring our dying son. What I did at the VR company's office left everyone stunned. Part 1. Discovery. The headset was heavier than I expected. Black and sleek, with complicated straps and a tangle of cables, it looked alien in my hands. I'd never used David's virtual reality system before. He'd always been protective of it, calling it his work research tool, and keeping it in his home office where he spent increasingly long hours. "It's too complex for casual use," he'd tell me whenever I expressed curiosity. Plus, the subscription is tied to my work account. After 15 years of marriage, I'd learned to respect David's boundaries. He was a software developer for a healthcare company, brilliant and dedicated. The past year had been especially difficult for us, with our 10-year-old son Ethan's leukemia diagnosis. Between hospital stays, treatments, and trying to maintain some normalcy for our daughter Lily, we were both exhausted and coping in our own ways. Mine was support groups and therapy. David's, apparently, was escaping into virtual reality. I might never have discovered the truth if not for two things happening simultaneously: Ethan's doctor calling with concerning test results, and our joint bank account app alerting me to an overdrawn status. The first filled me with familiar dread. Ethan's treatment wasn't working as hoped, and the doctor wanted to discuss alternative approaches immediately. The second confused me. David handled our finances, but we had substantial savings for emergencies, especially medical ones. How could we possibly be overdrawn? When I called the bank, the representative's explanation left me cold. Over the past 6 months, regular transfers have been made to something called Horizon Virtual Life, totaling nearly $48,000. Our emergency savings had been drained, and now our checking account was empty too. David wasn't answering his phone. He'd told me he had an important meeting and couldn't be disturbed. With Ethan stable but sleeping in his hospital room, I drove home in a fog of confusion and worry. I needed to understand what was happening before confronting my husband. In our home office, David's computer was locked as always, but the VR headset sat on his desk, plugged in and seemingly ready for use. I'd watched him log in enough times to have a general idea of how it worked. My hands shook as I put it on, adjusted the straps, and found myself in a virtual lobby with floating icons. One program dominated the recently used list: Horizon Life. I selected it with a virtual pointer and was prompted for a password. I tried David's usual variations: our anniversary, his childhood street, our children's birthdays. Nothing worked. In desperation, I tried Alice 0824, the name of his college girlfriend, and her birthday. The program launched. I found myself standing in what appeared to be a sunlit living room, modern, immaculate, nothing like our cluttered, lived-in home with evidence of a sick child and busy family. Through virtual windows, I could see an ocean view that we definitely couldn't afford in real life. "Darling, you're home early," a woman's voice called out. A stunningly beautiful avatar approached, perfect in every way, with flowing dark hair and an impossible figure. She moved with eerie realism. "The kids are at the beach with Mom. I thought we could have some alone time," she continued, reaching out to touch my avatar's face. I flinched back instinctively. "Don't you recognize me?" I asked, hearing my voice come out deeper, masculine. The woman frowned, perfect eyebrows drawing together. "David, is something wrong with your voice module?" I pulled off the headset, gasping for air that suddenly seemed too thin. I sat at David's desk, mind racing to process what I'd seen. Not just a game. Not work research, a whole other life, with another wife and kids. Hands trembling, I began searching through David's desk drawers. In the bottom one, hidden beneath folders, I found a small box containing a receipt for what the bank had called Horizon Virtual Life subscriptions. But this was far more than a regular gaming subscription. The paper detailed a Platinum Life package, including custom-designed avatars, private virtual property, exclusive AI companion customization, and something called accelerated virtual lifetime progression. The receipt also showed add-on packages for dependent life entities and extended family circle. The total matched the draining of our accounts. My phone rang. The hospital. Ethan was asking for his father. I promised we'd both be there soon, then texted David, "Emergency with Ethan. Meet me at the hospital ASAP." 30 minutes later, David rushed into Ethan's room, his face flushed and worried. "What happened? Is he okay?" Our son was asleep again, pale against the white hospital sheets, his body so small under the blankets. "The doctor called. His latest results aren't good," I said quietly. "But before we discuss that, I need you to explain something." I held up the receipt I'd found. "What is this and where is our savings?" David's face transformed. Shock, then guilt, followed quickly by defensiveness. "You went through my things? That's private." "Answer the question, David. Our son needs specialized treatment we can no longer afford because apparently you've been spending tens of thousands on what exactly? A virtual family?" "It's not what you think," he whispered, glancing at Ethan. "Let's talk outside." In the hallway, David's explanation emerged in fragmented, desperate bursts. Horizon Virtual Life wasn't just a game. It was an advanced life simulation, where users could create ideal versions of their lives with AI companions, so sophisticated they developed their own personalities over time. "It started as just an escape," he said, not meeting my eyes. "After Ethan's diagnosis, I couldn't handle the hospital visits, the constant fear. I created a place where I could breathe, where I wasn't watching my son die every day." "So you created a virtual family without cancer?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Without me?" His silence was answer enough. "The money, David. How could you spend Ethan's treatment funds on a fantasy?" He ran his hands through his hair, a nervous gesture I'd once found endearing. It got out of control. The basic subscription was manageable, but then they offered customization packages, property upgrades, specialized AI development. I told myself it was temporary, that I needed this to stay sane for all of us. While you were living your perfect virtual life, I've been here in reality holding our son through chemo, explaining to our daughter why her brother might die, working part-time to help with medical bills you were apparently spending on digital real estate. A nurse gave us a warning look, and I lowered my voice. "The doctor wants to try an experimental treatment. It's not covered by insurance." We needed that savings, David. For the first time, true horror crossed his face. I didn't realize it had gotten so bad with Ethan. "Because you haven't been here," I said simply. "None of us have seen you for more than an hour or two at a time in months. Now I understand why." David reached for me, but I stepped back. "I'll fix this," he promised. "I'll call Horizon tomorrow, explain the situation. They must have some refund policy for emergencies." I didn't believe him, but our son's needs came first. "We're meeting Dr. Tom Levine at 9 a.m. tomorrow to discuss options. Be there." That night, I stayed at the hospital while David went home. I sat beside Ethan's bed, researching Horizon Virtual Life on my phone. What I discovered was disturbing. The company was notorious for its predatory subscription models and nearly impossible cancellation policies. Their terms of service, which I found buried on their website, explicitly stated that customized virtual assets were non-refundable under any circumstances. Forums were filled with stories of people who had lost jobs, relationships, and savings to their virtual lives. Some users described it as more addictive than any drug. Horizon defended itself as providing necessary emotional outlets in a challenging world, while lobbying against regulatory oversight. By morning, I had a plan. When David didn't show up for the 9 a.m. meeting with Dr. Levine, I knew exactly where he was. Part 2. Confrontation. Horizon's headquarters occupied a gleaming high-rise in downtown Seattle. Unlike the sterile, corporate aesthetic I expected, their lobby resembled an upscale hotel. Plush seating areas, ambient lighting, and staff who looked more like concierges than receptionists. I approached the welcome desk with determined calm. Ethan's latest medical report in my hand. "I need to speak with someone about my husband's account," I said to the young man behind the counter. "It's an emergency situation." "Do you have an appointment?" he asked, his smile professional but distant. "Account services are by reservation only." "No, but this can't wait. My husband has spent our son's medical treatment funds on your service. Our son has leukemia." I placed Ethan's medical report on the counter. "I'm not leaving until someone addresses this." The receptionist's smile didn't waver, but his eyes flicked to a security guard near the elevator. "I understand your concern, but without your husband's authorization, we cannot discuss his account due to our privacy policy. Perhaps you could have him call our customer service line. He's currently in your virtual world and has been for the past 18 hours straight. He missed our son's critical medical consultation this morning. I've tried calling your customer service line 3 times. No one picks up." My voice had risen, attracting attention from people in the lobby. The security guard began moving in our direction. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice," the receptionist said. Something inside me snapped. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone, opening the folder of photos I'd compiled. Ethan in his hospital bed, his medication schedule, his progression through chemo, and screenshots of our now empty bank accounts, alongside Horizon payment receipts. "My name is Rachel Winters. My husband, David, has spent $48,000 on your service in 6 months, while our 10-year-old son is dying. I'm not leaving until someone explains how you justify draining a family's medical emergency fund for virtual reality fantasies." I turned to face the growing crowd in the lobby. In fact, I'd like everyone here to see exactly what Horizon's emotional outlet really costs. The security guard reached me, but instead of ejecting me, he hesitated when several people began filming with their phones. A woman in a sharp business suit emerged from the elevator, quickly assessing the situation. "Mrs. Winters, I'm Vivian Chen, Director of Client Relations," she said smoothly. "Please come upstairs so we can discuss your concerns privately." "I've tried privacy," I replied loudly enough for the onlookers to hear. "Now I want answers publicly. How many other families has your company destroyed? How many children have suffered because parents escaped into your fantasy world?" Miss Chen's professional veneer cracked slightly. "Security, please clear the lobby. Mrs. Winters, either come with me now or I'll be forced to call the police." "Call them," I challenged. "I'd love to explain to them and the media how your company knowingly depleted a cancer patient's treatment fund." A man in the lobby stepped forward. "I'm a reporter with the Seattle Times," he said, holding up press credentials. "I'd be very interested in this story." Miss Chen's expression turned calculating. "5th floor conference room," she said tersely. 5 minutes. Upstairs, 3 Horizon executives waited with Ms. Chen. They offered practiced sympathy while explaining that their terms of service clearly stated all purchases were final. "We understand your situation is difficult," one said. sliding a document across the table. As a goodwill gesture, we can offer 3 months of free service for your husband once your financial situation improves. I stared at them in disbelief. My son might not have 3 months. I don't want free service. I want our money back so we can pay for his treatment. Unfortunately, that's not possible, Ms. Chen said. Your husband agreed to our terms, making these purchases willingly and repeatedly over time. He's addicted to your product. You've designed it specifically to be addictive. We design immersive experiences, another executive corrected. How users interact with those experiences is beyond our control. I stood, gathering my things. Then I have nothing more to say to you, but I have plenty to say to the people downstairs, to the reporter, to every parent group and cancer support organization I belong to. Miss Chen's eyes narrowed. Are you threatening us with negative publicity? I'm promising you the truth, I replied, and I'm starting with finding my husband in your facility and disconnecting him myself. This caught them off guard. What do you mean? The location tracking on his phone shows he's been in your building since yesterday. You have immersion rooms here, don't you? Private spaces where users can experience your world without interruption. The executives exchanged glances. They hadn't expected me to know about their exclusive on-site services, available only to their highest-paying clients. Mrs. Winters, those areas are restricted. Either take me to my husband right now, or I walk out that door and tell everyone exactly how Horizon helps parents abandon their dying children for digital fantasies. 10 minutes later, I stood outside a door marked Premium Immersion Suite 4. Miss Chen swiped a keycard, and we entered a dimly lit room where David sat in a specialized recliner, headset obscuring his face, his body occasionally twitching as he interacted with his virtual world. David, I said loudly. No response. Miss Chen cleared her throat. The immersion is quite deep. He likely can't hear you. I approached my husband and removed the headset from his face. His eyes were unfocused, confused, then horrified as he recognized me. Rachel, what are you doing here? Ethan's doctor meeting was this morning, I said quietly. You missed it. Again. David looked at the executives hovering uncomfortably by the door, then back to me. How did you find me? That doesn't matter. What matters is our son needs treatment we can no longer afford because of this. I gestured to the equipment surrounding him. The doctor believes there's an experimental protocol that might help, but it costs $42,000 and isn't covered by insurance. David's face crumpled. I lost track of time. I was going to talk to them about a refund today. We already tried, I said, nodding toward the executives. They've made it very clear that's not an option. Miss Chen stepped forward. Mr. Winters, your wife has expressed concerns about your spending. While we cannot offer refunds, we might be able to work out a payment plan for future. There won't be any future services, I interrupted. David, it's time to choose your virtual family or your real one. The room fell silent as my husband looked from me to the VR equipment. For a terrible moment, I thought he might actually hesitate. Then he stood, legs slightly unsteady after hours of immobility. I need to get to the hospital. How is Ethan today? Relief washed through me. Asking for you. David turned to the Horizon executives. I want my account terminated completely. Sir, your custom assets represent a significant investment, one began. I don't care, David said firmly. Delete everything. Ms. Chen's professional mask slipped again. Mr. Winters, perhaps you should take some time to consider. My son is dying while I've been living in a fantasy, David cut her off. There's nothing to consider. As we prepared to leave, I turned to the executives. We still need that money back. Our son's treatment can't wait. As we explained our policy, Miss Chen began. Your policy is going to make for an excellent news story, I replied. I've downloaded David's usage data showing how your system encouraged spending during vulnerable emotional states, specifically targeting him with family wellness packages after each of our son's hospital admissions. This was partially a bluff. I had some data from David's email receipts, but not the full usage analytics. Yet their reactions told me I'd hit a nerve. That information is proprietary, one executive said sharply. So is my family's medical information. But that didn't stop your algorithm from exploiting it to sell virtual alternatives while my real child suffered. Miss Chen signaled to a colleague who left the room quickly. When he returned, he whispered something that made her expression shift from annoyance to calculation. We may be able to make an exception in your case, she said finally, given the unique circumstances. Within an hour, we had written confirmation of a compassionate emergency refund of $42,000, precisely the amount needed for Ethan's experimental treatment. The agreement included a confidentiality clause, which I signed with one modification. We would not disclose the refund amount or specific circumstances, but retained the right to discuss the broader impact of VR addiction on families. As we left Horizon's headquarters, David squeezed my hand. I'm so sorry, Rachel. I don't know how I let it get so far. We'll talk about that later. I said, right now, Ethan needs us. Both of us. Part 3. Healing. The next 3 months were a blur of hospital visits as Ethan began the experimental treatment protocol. David took a leave of absence from work to be present every day, relearning how to exist in the real world with its pain, uncertainty, and moments of unexpected joy. One evening, as Ethan slept peacefully in his hospital bed, his latest blood work showing promising signs of response to the treatment, David finally told me the full story of his virtual escape. After Ethan's diagnosis, I couldn't handle the helplessness, he confessed. In the virtual world, I could control everything. My virtual son never got sick. My virtual wife never looked at me with disappointment. It was perfect. Too perfect, I said. Life isn't supposed to be perfect, David. It's supposed to be real. He nodded, tears streaming down his face. I missed so much. Real moments that I can never get back. But you're here now, I reminded him. That's what matters to Ethan, and to me. Recovery wasn't linear for any of us. David attended therapy and support groups for VR addiction, a growing problem with few established treatment protocols. I worked through my anger and betrayal with my own therapist. Ethan faced the physical challenges of his treatment with remarkable courage. 6 months after our confrontation at Horizon, I received an email from the reporter who had been in the lobby that day. He was working on an investigative piece about VR addiction and predatory pricing models. Would we be willing to share our story? David and I discussed it carefully. The confidentiality agreement prevented specific disclosures, but we could speak to the broader issues. We decided to participate anonymously, providing redacted documents showing the pattern of targeted marketing that had exploited our family's medical crisis. The article, when published, sparked a national conversation about the ethics of immersive technology. Other families came forward with similar stories. Regulatory agencies began investigations. Horizon's stock dropped dramatically. A year after I discovered David's virtual life, Ethan's doctor used the word remission for the first time. We celebrated quietly as a family, including Lily, who had shown remarkable resilience throughout her brother's illness and her parents' crisis. I want to go camping, Ethan declared. his voice stronger than it had been in months. A real camping trip, not a virtual one. David's eyes met mine across the kitchen table. Real camping it is, he agreed, with bugs and burned marshmallows and everything. That weekend, as we sat around a campfire in a state park just 2 hours from our home, I watched my husband helping our son perfect the art of roasting the perfect marshmallow. Lily was nearby, carefully constructing an elaborate s'more with extra chocolate. David caught me watching and smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes in a way it hadn't for a long time before his addiction, and certainly hadn't during it. "Thank you," he said quietly when the kids were distracted. "For fighting for us when I couldn't." "For us," I repeated, taking his hand. "Not just for you or for me, but for what we built together. This real, imperfect, precious life." The stars above us were not rendered by advanced graphics engines. The warmth of the fire wasn't simulated. The sticky marshmallow residue on our fingers couldn't be cleaned with a virtual gesture. Everything was gloriously, challengingly real, including the uncertainty of Ethan's long-term prognosis and the ongoing work of rebuilding trust in our marriage. As I looked at my family in the flickering firelight, I wouldn't have traded a moment of our messy reality for the most perfect virtual alternative. The real world might break our hearts sometimes, but it was the only place where genuine love and healing could exist. David had discovered this truth the hard way. Now, as he taught Ethan how to identify constellations in the night sky, knowledge he'd gained specifically for this trip, studying astronomy books during hospital visits, I could see he understood what his virtual life had never been able to provide: the irreplaceable value of being present for the people who truly loved him, especially during their most difficult moments. Our story wasn't over. Ethan would need ongoing monitoring. David's recovery was a daily commitment. Our family's financial situation remained precarious. But we were facing it all together, in the real world, the only place where it truly mattered.